Hey everybody. Hey everybody, this is Desmond coming at you from the Brass Ring. And this video here is actually part two of a first video I did on Kalyn James. Kalyn James, for those who aren't familiar with her, she's the young lady, former Miss Alabama. Her name is Kalyn Chapman James, who actually posts a Facebook video concerning her conflict about the police officers in Texas that was gunned down in response to the many shootings of people of color in the United States that are taking place, and they're going unanswered as far as criminal punishment. She posted a video saying how she was conflicted about feeling bad for the officers that lost their lives. I did a whole part one video on this. I don't want to repeat things I said on part one and retract and go back and just make this video longer than it has to be. So I advise you to listen to that one, because when I jump into what I'm going to discuss in this video in part two, it'll make sense and it'll tie everything. Hey everybody, this is Desmond coming at you from the Brass Ring. And this video here is actually part two of a first video I did on Kalyn James. Kalyn James, for those who aren't familiar with her, she's the young lady, former Miss Alabama. Her name is Kalyn Chapman James, who actually posts a Facebook video concerning her conflict about the police officers in Texas that was gunned down in response to the many shootings of people of color in the United States that are taking place, and they're going unanswered as far as criminal punishment. She posted a video saying how she was conflicted about feeling bad for the officers that lost their lives. I did a whole part one video on this. Hey everybody, this is Desmond coming at you from the Brass Ring. And this video here is actually part two of a first video I did on Kalyn James. Kalyn James, for those who aren't familiar with her, she's the young lady, former Miss Alabama. Her name is Kalyn Chapman James, who actually posts a Facebook video concerning her conflict about the police officers in Texas that was gunned down in response to the many shootings of people of color in the United States that are taking place, and they're going unanswered as far as criminal punishment. She posted a video saying how she was conflicted about feeling bad for the officers that lost their lives. I did a whole part one video on this. I don't want to repeat things I said on part one and retract and go back and just make this video longer than it has to be. So I advise you to listen to that one, because when I jump into what I'm going to discuss in this video in part two, it'll make sense and it'll tie everything together. One thing that people need to understand, and it's hard for you to understand if you're not in the position. I'll tell you for certain that the way people of color in the United States think is very different than than white people think in this country. The view of the United States is very different than the view of the United States from people of color, and it's because historically our beginnings and the treatment has been different. For the most part, and I say for the most part because there's always individual instances, but for the most part, the law, the judicial system has worked in favor of people who are not of color, for white people. So all the things that they say is your right as a U.S. citizen, as a human being, for the most part, for white individuals, it's worked. They run the government, so when they exercise laws and things that are passed, most of the time it works out for them. And this is going to tie into Kalyn James. I'm just trying to give a little back history for people that don't know. And this is strict, and this is Christianity all the way around. So what we need to understand is when this nation was colonized, Europeans came here seeking their own living situation from England. They specifically came here to habitat, to procreate, to grow, and to set up a new life. Stumbling upon the Native Americans was actually an accident. When they came here to colonize and be amongst themselves. They did not want to be amongst Native Americans. That's why, as history tells us, that's why there was conflict, because at some point they wanted to push the Native Americans back, move them off the land so they can colonize and be amongst themselves. They never looked at the Native Americans as equals. They looked at them as people that they didn't want to raise their kids around, they didn't want to associate with. They viewed themselves on a higher status of Native Americans, and that's where the word savage comes from. They thought that their ways were very savage. They thought that their ways were very primal. So they had no intent of ever living in harmony with Native Americans. So once they pushed the Native Americans back, they brought over Africans from Africa for slave labor. The land needed to be populated, crops needed to be grown, buildings needed to be constructed, things of that nature. It was going to take a lot of manpower, a lot of hours. So the easiest way to go about it was to get someone else to do the work. So they found out that they can get Africans from Africa, bring them over to the United States for slavery. One thing about slavery I want to point out, because one thing you hear a lot from people who are racist, they'll say that, well, Africans sold Africans into slavery. They sold their own people. What we need to understand is slavery in Africa and slavery in the United States was two completely different concepts. Slavery in Africa was amongst tribal wars. So if one tribe conquered another tribe, they could, whatever was left was the spoils of war. So they can plunder, they could take their material items, take their women, take the men, and enslave them. So they were basically plunder for war. So when Africans sold other Africans to the Europeans, it had nothing to do with color. Slavery in Africa had nothing to do with the color of a person's skin. The color of a person's skin did not relegate them or delegate them to slavery, a life of slavery. It was strictly the spoils of war. Slavery in the United States was based solely on the color of a person's skin. Didn't matter about their character. Didn't matter if they had integrity. Didn't matter if they had a good heart. None of that made any difference. If you came out into this earth through birth and you had dark skin, or you was a person of color, then you was delegated to slavery, period. So what you see now is a generational institution of slavery, strictly based off of skin color. So as time went on and Africans won their rights to not be considered property anymore, at least from a legal standpoint, the same thing happened. The Europeans that was here did not want to live amongst Africans. That was never the plan. So once slavery ended, you had all these Africans who are now free, who are now able to compete for jobs, who are now able to compete for businesses and things of that nature, go to schools with everyone else here, and that posed a different problem. So we need to understand that Europeans, when they set up this nation, they never intended to cohabitat and coexist with Native Americans, with Africans, with the Chinese who were just over here for, again, labor, working on railroads and things of that nature. They never intended to live amongst these people. So I'm going to take that, just lay that foundation till today. That type of thinking is what we're seeing today. It's very systemic of an institution that was set up for and by basically Europeans. they established this country just for them. They did not want to introduce diversity from a racial standpoint in any aspect whatsoever. People of color was just used for labor in this country. They were never meant to be living side by side. They were never meant to compete for jobs, compete for education, be educated, compete for business, nothing of that nature. But once slavery ended, the United States was basically stuck because you have these Africans, you can't send them anywhere because they were born on this soiled land. And by the law of the land, if you're born in this country, then you're a naturalized citizen. So they had to find other ways to distance themselves from people of color. So they set up different systems that could do that. Segregation, Jim Crow laws, the list goes on and on and on. I really don't want to give a history lesson. I just want to give a background on the racial history of this country. And I'm going to draw the correlations because the Bible is at the center of all of it. And what I mean by that, I don't mean the Bible caused it, but the Bible talks about these things. Slavery is as old as dirt. Back when Egyptian ruled, or back in Rome, and I'll take Egypt because it's for Christians. It's a better and an easier correlation. When Egypt was in control and they enslaved Israel, it was the same thing. Egyptians did not want to live amongst the Israelites. That was never their intention. Israel was used for slavery and for manual labor, but they were never intended to compete with Egyptians on any level, and Egyptians did not want to live amongst them. They thought Israelites were savage because of the different religious practices that they had. If you're not familiar with the book of Joseph, Joseph speaks about that a little bit, about how the worship practices of his people, the Hebrews, that Pharaoh would find it disgusting. They would find it distasteful if they was to witness how they worshiped to the God that they worshiped. So this is not a new story, what's going on in the United States. This is a very old thing. And I know people find it hard to understand how we can look at a video after video after video after video, and you see people being killed and you see it being justified. It's the same way how it was in Egypt. The Egyptians made a very valiant effort to show Israelites as being less than. Once you put out the perception and you work this message of someone being less than, and you start to belittle and you start to oppress and you start to produce propaganda and you start to dehumanize, it makes it easier to do things like oppression, economic oppression, physical assaults. It makes it easier to do these things because the good people who were in Egypt, meaning the people who did not believe in people being tortured, killed, and things of that nature, once you get them on your side and looking at the Israelites as less than and looking at them as less than human or animalistic, savage, whatever you want to call it, then it makes it easier for the government to do the most distasteful and destructive things that it can conjure up. Pass all kinds of laws that are ridiculously biased, unequal, and in many cases inhuman. So this is not a new situation for those of us who knows the Bible and studies the Bible. So we see it today. The same thing goes on today, which is why you can see people being killed and it be justified in every possible way, shape, or form. So With all that being said, Kalyn James Chapman basically was discussing and bringing out the conflict that she felt. And I think she was struggling with the fact is does that mean she's not a Christian, or is she less Christian than the next person, or what exactly does that mean? But the truth is we always have conflict. You can be the most strict Christian on your block, in your city, in your state, but at some point something's going to happen in your life or to someone that you care about that hits home, and it's going to bring you to a conflict of interest, emotionally and spiritually. So that's what she was feeling. Me being a Christian, I have no quarrels at all with what's going on today. I'm not conformed of the world. I was pulled out of the world by Christ, but I'm very much intact on what's going on in the world. It's not going to change. Let me just say that right now. I'm not saying that we should not push for better things. I'm not saying that going on strike or signing petitions or things of that nature is something that should not be done. What I'm saying is, as Christians, we know that this is the way of the world. Paul said it in 2 Timothy, perilous times shall come. And we're definitely in perilous times now. And we're seeing it played out on TV right before our eyes. So is she less went through the normal conflict that people have when something hits home and happens to their life or to someone that they care about and that they love? So again, the system can't work unless it gets people who have good hearts to look the other way, or convince them that what they're doing is in their best interest. And as old as slavery is, Germans did it against the Jews, Egyptians did it against the Israelites, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Fast forward today, the United States does it against people of color. It's not going to get better, and the reason why it's not going to get better, number one, the Bible said it's not going to get better. But number two, what you see is a system that's intact, that's not changing. They never change the system. They just keep putting band-aids and revamping certain things in the system. But in order to fix it, they have to overhaul the whole system. So it's the foundation that this country was built upon. That's the issue. And no amount of band-aiding, or in legal sense, no amount of bills and different things that they pass is going to change it. The whole foundation needs to be torn up and redone again. And that's not going to happen. And this message, I don't mean for this message to be grim, because that's not what I'm trying to do here, is make it grim. But we need to understand that when you have a certain group of people in charge, they are not going to give up what they control. They'll let you in to do certain things, but as far as giving up control of whatever it is they control, they're not going to let you do that. So Europeans run this country. They control this country from a political and an economical standpoint, a legal standpoint, and they're not going to give up control of it. No amount of protesting, no amount of marching, no amount of preaching is going to change any of that. They're just not going to do it. And I guess actually that is a pretty grim lesson. But that has nothing to do with people being treated equally and as human beings. The thing about equality is that if everything's equal and people are treated as such, the balance of power can always shift. Because if you have two individuals and they're both talented, but one happens to be more talented than the other, and that person happens to be a person of color, and they're in a position to hold a high office, whether it be president of the United States, a judge, or anything like that, then it becomes problematic to keep control, because you're going to have instances where a person of color is going to be more, qualified to do a particular job than someone who's not. So these are the things that makes this country hold on to its old institutions and systems that are in place, because to have a truly fair and balanced system, the balance of power will always shift. It'll always change. No one group can hold power over another group, or groups plural, if it's equal, because you're going to have certain periods where power shift. You'll have one period where most of the people that held the highest positions in government are people of color. Then you're going to have times when it was people who are white. Then you're going to have times, so it's going to always shift. But to keep a constant position of power, you have to set up laws, bills, and have a system in place that constantly keeps the people who are in power in power. So that's what we're seeing here. It's the same way with the police system. Police hold a lot of power as far as they are the governing group of citizens on the ground. So that has to be controlled, because given the leverage that police officers have, given the overabundance of evidence that has to be presented in order for a police officer to be convicted of any crime, so it's very systemic. So it keeps the balance of power exactly where the government wants it to be. So I think, number one, the video that Kalyn James was very brave for a couple reasons. I think it was very brave socially, because her doing the video, I mean, she there was a price to pay, and she paid it. A lot of people, like I said, they blasted her on it. They ridiculed her, called her names, and, you know, as the Bible will call it, she was persecuted and ridiculed, which is something that every Christian is going to go through if you're standing on truth. I don't care who you are. If you're a Christian and you follow the life of Christ and you follow the gospel, you're going to be persecuted for what you believe in. You're going to be persecuted for what you stand up for. So that's something that you better get used to. And if that has not happened to you yet, then you need to reevaluate your Christianity, because that should have happened to you at some point in your life. If it has not, then you haven't taken a stand for anything, or the things that you should have taken a stand for. And I'm just using this as an example. The stand can be for anything, but I'm using the injustices between law enforcement and people of color as an example, because this is what the video is about. But it can be anything. God called us to take a stand and stand on truth. You can't have two masters. A man cannot have two masters. Christ said that. For he'll love one and he'll hate the other. So if you see someone doing something wrong, and you're a police officer, or you're military, or you're another position that requires great character and integrity, and you look the other way, or you fail to reel that person in and correct them, then you made your choice. You've chosen your master at that point, and you chose men. You chose the adoration and the respect of men over the adoration and the respect of God. So person can't have two masters. So anyway, this is part 2 of that video. I just wanted to expand upon it, because the the content really on what she did was not, the first video was enough to suffice. So I made this video here. Anyway, before I leave, one last note I want to say, and I kind of touched on it in the first video, but we have to get to a point as Christians and as people of color where we stop trying to have people identify with what we're talking about or what we've been through. That is a losing battle. I don't care how elegant you put the words. I don't care how many videos you produce. You're never going to make some people understand or see things the way that you see it, because they don't have, simply because they don't have the same experience. They don't have the same experiences that you have. They don't have the same history that you have. So they're not going to understand. We have to stop wasting our time trying to have others understand everything that we go through. That in itself is biblical. When Christ sent the apostles out, he said, go out as tubes, nothing on your feet. Do not take a whole bunch of money. Go door to door. Whoever receives you, you go in and you preach the gospel. Whoever rejects you, you wipe the dust off your feet and you keep it moving. We have to do the same thing as people of color. You're going to have some people, just like the gospel, who are ready to receive it, whose heart is in a place that they're ready to hear what you're saying. And that's who you spend your time with, because your time with them is not a waste of time. And then you have people that no matter how much Bible you know, how much praying you do, they're not going to receive what you're saying. So it's the same thing with social instances. No matter how much time you spend with that person, if is in a particular place, if their heart is so hardened and their neck is so stiff, they're not going to hear what you're saying. So just know that everyone's not going to understand. And we need to not try to make everyone understand, because really, they're really not, should not be the focal point. Our focal point should be the people whose heart is in the right place to hear the gospel, and whose heart is in the right place to hear social injustices and call it and recognize it when they see it. So as Christians, let's push forward. Let's do the work and the will of God, whatever it is that he called you to do. Make sure you do it. Don't let people who don't agree with you or understand, or who persecute you, detract you from what you've been called to do. I'm going to speak more, not about this particular topic, but about Christianity from a doctrinal standpoint in general, because a lot of Christianity today has been watered down and washed out. Christians today have been made to look and appear very fragile and very weak. But I say to you, if Christ is who he is, how can you be fragile and weak? Christ was none of those things. He was fragile nor weak. So we need to get back to the basics of Christianity. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of people today in the authoritative positions that are actually teaching Christianity the way that it should be taught. Their teaching of Christianity is very subservient and is very captive. It keeps you locked in a place waiting for something to happen. Christianity is never about waiting for anything to happen. Christianity is about action. Faith without actions is dead faith. So we have to be forever active and forever diligent with this Christianity walk. And I'm going to touch on this in another video, especially about the forgiveness aspect of Christianity, which has been totally lost and totally taken out of context. Lost my train of thought there for a second. Anyway, this video is coming up on 30 minutes, so I'm gonna cut this out now. I'll bring another video, and until I post another video up to everyone that's looking at it, God bless, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.